So the vehicle we're going to be working on today is a 2008 Ford Escape. In this case, I know for a fact that these ignition coils and the spark plugs have been changed out, which is your basic tune-up. So those two are not the problem. And the misfire was, it doesn't misfire at idle. So if you turn the vehicle on and the vehicle is just parked running, it does not misfire. But I was told that the vehicle misfires around 45 to 50 miles per hour. But in park, it does not misfire. So if the vehicle misfires at idle, usually it's a spark, which either the spark plug wires, the coil, or else the spark plugs themselves. So in this case, I actually went ahead and bought some fuel injectors. Went online. If you go to AutoZone O'Reilly, it costs more at the store, but the store comes with a warranty. So if these are defective, you simply go back to the store and they'll give you some new ones. That's the good thing about going to the store. But if you buy them online, you're going to have to go through the process of returning, shipping, and all kinds of mess. So it is a gamble to go online, but online you do get them cheaper. So today we're going to be changing out the fuel injectors. Start by taking out the battery. And a lot of people actually intimidated by the battery. They're worried about getting shocked, getting electrocuted. It won't shock you if you're touching one side, but if you touch both at the same time, you are going to get a shock. If you handle the battery correctly, there's really nothing to worry about. Just don't touch both sides. Start unplugging. So one of the first times I worked on a vehicle was to swap out an engine. So if your memory is not good like mine, or record, write down on a piece of paper, record what you take apart and where things go. And you don't even have to disconnect everything. I mean, these two parts can stay together. Just simply undo what you have to, move things out of the way. And you also want to have a container for your bolts rather than placing them around the engine bay. I like to have one container for the bolts, and I like to use the magnetic one so it holds the sockets that I'm using. That way I don't have to go back over here, lose it, misplace it. I recommend getting are these little extensions. So these little extensions fit inside a drill. Then you simply hook up your socket to the drill. Makes taking out the sockets, makes taking out the bolts a lot easier. And so far, what we're trying to do is get underneath this. We have disconnected a bunch of vacuum lines back here. Taking out the throttle, move the throttle out of the way. This is their EGR here. We just disconnect this. Then there was a sensor sitting here. Just trying to disconnect everything that is holding on to this intake manifold, because the fuel injectors are underneath this thing. So we got to take this, move it out of the way in order to get to the fuel injectors. So now we got the manifold out here, unbolted, pushed out of the way. Your fuel rail. This metal tube over here is going to run all the way back to the back of the vehicle to your fuel tank. So we're just going to be unbolting this fuel rail, unplugging all the connectors front and back, move this out of the way, change out your fuel injectors. Before I remove the fuel rail, I forgot that we're supposed to relieve the fuel pressure. So if I try to pull off this fuel rail, fuel is going to spray all over the place. And I know this from experience because I actually did it before. So what we're supposed to do in this fuse box here, it's not identified what fuse and what relay is what. So looking on the internet, I found this little diagram which identifies which what fuse and what relay is what. So looking at this little diagram here, it says 31B is going to be our fuel pump relay. So over here we look, this says 21, which indicates all of these is 21, A to D. Here's 30. Over here is 31, 31B. So 31B is going to be this section here. 31B is going to be this relay. So obviously I cannot start the vehicle to relieve the pressure. But before I took everything apart, what you want to do is pull out the fuel pump relay. And that disables the fuel pump from sending fuel to the fuel rail. So you would remove the relay, start the vehicle, and just let it run until it turns off. So what that would do is relieve the fuel pressure in the fuel rails. But like I said, I forgot to do that. It's going to happen. At this point, we do not have to put everything back together just to do that. What I'm going to do is remove this fuel pressure regulator, and there is going to be pressure underneath. So all I'm going to do is wrap this rag around it, catch as much fuel as I can. So I mean, it's going to happen. You're going to forget. If you have a memory as bad as mine, you are going to forget to relieve the fuel pressure. So what I did is wrap the rag all the way around the fuel rail, around the fuel pressure regulator, remove the bolts, slowly wiggled it out, and allowed any fuel pressure to relieve itself, and the rag caught all the fuel so it didn't spray all over the place, making a big mess. So now I got the fuel rail loosened up. See a couple of fuel injectors still sitting down there. All it pretty much does is slide back into place. Then this bottom portion goes down into this hole, and it just pops right back in. The sun's about to go down. It's gonna be getting kind of dark, so all I'm gonna do up to this point is cover everything up with the rag. So now I've got everything covered up. It's kind of windy. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so it's been a couple of days. I didn't anticipate the wind, and I'm gonna be hooking up my air compressor. Like I said, it was windy a couple days. I'm gonna use this tool here, hook it up to my air compressor, and blow off any dirt that might have gotten onto the engine. I want people to know that I got this air compressor, the hose, and also the little fittings that go with it. I got this all from Harbor Freight, and I mentioned to Harbor Freight that I wanted to represent some of their tools. I have a bunch of other tools. I got my ball joint press there in the back. Got my torque wrench, Badlands jack right there underneath the porch. So it's pretty good. I mean, their prices are low and their tools are actually pretty decent. I mean, this air compressor, I got this back in 2019, and it is actually still working pretty good. I mean, it still holds air and it works when I need it. I just plug it in, turn it on. It airs up pretty quick, airs up my tires, and it really comes in handy because of all the vehicles I'm working on. That Escape over there, the Neon, I work on this Explorer, this Jeep Liberty. This compressor is really useful, and like I said, I got it from Harbor Freight. When you're taking off the intake manifold, you want to be careful of these little gaskets. They do fall out, so you want to be careful that they don't fall where you don't want it to. Make sure they're intact. Injectors, there's little O-rings, one on the bottom and one on the top, and they can possibly fall off. This one is stuck in here on the fuel rail, but you want to be careful that it does not fall down the intake and fall into the cylinder where the combustion happens. Just cover it up if you have to. Cover it up with a rag. And you got these little clips that hold the fuel injector to the fuel rail. Got all the fuel injectors off right here, all the old dirty ones. Got all the old clips right here. You want to make sure you don't lose any one of these clips. They help hold the fuel injectors in place. So all these little holes down here, it's where all the fuel injectors go. There's 3 more on this side. Be blowing some air in there. Dirt right around this area where it sits on the engine is where the dirt usually falls in. So we're going to try to get that. Okay, so now we got the engine portion blown out with air. When you're checking the fuel rail, you want to make sure the O-rings are still not in there. As you can see, this O-ring is still sitting in there, and then there's one in here also. So you want to make sure you reach in there and pull out those O-rings, and it doesn't hurt to apply some air, blow any dirt out of there that might have got in. So next we are going to be putting in the fuel injectors. So fuel injectors come with new O-rings, so you do not have to use the old ones. But before you install it, I got a little bit of engine oil, 5W30, doesn't really matter. Just dip your finger in there, put it around the O-ring, and then put the fuel injector back into the fuel rail. And since we're doing the fuel rail first, we're just going to put some oil on the top O-ring. Then when we're putting the fuel rail back onto the engine, we will do the bottom O-ring. If you don't put any oil on the O-ring won't seat right, and gasoline will leak from the injector once you start the vehicle. And when you put the little clips back on, it should make a little clicking noise indicating that it is snapped back into place. So this is a V6 we are working on, so it's going to have 6 fuel injectors. Everything's hooked up. Move things aside, make some room so we can slide the fuel rail back onto the engine. And now we are going to lubricate the rings, the bottom O-rings. Okay, so now we got the fuel rail back in. If you can see that, it's seated right back where it's supposed to go. You want to make your way in slowly. You don't have a lot of space to get in between the 2 cylinder heads on a V6 or V8. 4 cylinders is a lot easier. But for this one, it is hard to maneuver, but it can go in. Do not force it. Just take your time and it will get in there. It's going to be a little difficult at first. You can reach in and move the injectors inward because they're kind of spread out. So you can push them in a little to maneuver its way in. So just take your time. Don't force it. And when we oiled the bottom O-rings, it helped the fuel injectors seat right into place. And now that it's in, before you bolt it down, you see I haven't put the bolts in yet. You want to reach in. You should be able to grab the fuel injector and just give it a twist. Twist it so that it is going right into place. You should be able to reach each one. As you can see right there, I'm moving it. Twist it just so it goes right into place. That way you do not have any fuel leaking once you start the engine. So now that everything's back in, we're going to start putting it all back together. So like I mentioned earlier, if you're not familiar working on a vehicle, these bolts could go just about anywhere. So if you don't have a good memory like me, or it's your first time, you want to write everything down. Or for me, in this case, I could easily go back to my video, rewind it, and see where the bolt went. So if you're not familiar with the engine, it is good to label it by plastic bag and mark it with the marker indicating where the bolts go. If you're using a drill, you're not going to use this to tighten it up. You're just going to tighten it enough to where the bolt is seated. And once it's seated, you're going to take out your torque wrench and you're gonna torque the bolt down to the proper specs. So this is not going to tell you whether it's tight enough or it's too tight. This can also break the bolt or strip the thread. So do not use this to tighten it up. You're just using it to seat the bolts. So now we got the fuel rail plugged back in. Each little injector plugged back in. Fuel pressure regulator is hooked back up. So around this area is where the intake manifold is going to be touching. So if there's any dirt or grease or gunk on these areas, you want to clean them off real quick so it sits on there nice and tight. You don't want any dirt in between, so that the two components will mate flush and there will be no air gaps. So you want to wipe down everything just to make it a clean surface so everything goes back together smoothly. Also double check your work. Make sure you plug back in everything you disconnected. Like I said, take your time, don't rush, double check everything, because you don't want to have to put everything back together and take every single thing back apart just because you missed one plug. So when you're tightening up the intake manifold, most vehicles have a tightening sequence, and it'll be numbered on a diagram showing each bolt and a number from 1 to however number of bolts there are. In this case, there's 8 bolts, so it'll be numbered 1 to 8, and you would just tighten it in that order so that it seats perfectly. Some vehicles do not have a tightening sequence. In that case, you just want to start from the inside and work your way out. Start from the center bolts, crisscross pattern if you like, and just start from the inside and work your way to the outside bolts. And then when you remove it, removal will be the opposite of the tightening sequence. You'll just start from the outside and work your way in. And I know not everyone has the manual on their vehicles. I mean, why spend $40-50 on a manual when you can just go online, type in the year, make, and model, the engine size, it has to be the correct engine size, look up the tightening sequence through Google, and it'll show you a diagram, a little picture, be able to tighten up your vehicle's bolts according to that picture online. So now the intake manifold is nice and tight. Just double checking the bolts. Got the vacuum lines hooked back up. These little clamps don't seem necessary, but trust me, they will pop off if you do not re-clamp it. So make sure you put your clamps back on if they are there. And we got these 2 parts hooked back up. 2 bolts here, 2 bolts on this EGR. Got this idle air control. When we come to the throttle, before we bolt it back up, same concept. So we wiped off the areas where the 2 surfaces meet, and we want it to mate nice and smoothly with no dirt in between, because the dirt will cause a gap. So there's nothing wrong with grabbing a rag and wiping this, but you want to be careful because this is aluminum. If you get a piece of metal and you scratch this hard enough, it will cause an air leak. So be careful with the aluminum components. And on this side also, you want to also wipe this part off so it's a nice clean surface. Everything hooks together just right and no air sneaks through. We got the throttle back on, all 4 bolts back on, plugged back in. And you got the bracket for the cables put back on. Everything is secure. Use all the bolts. I remember when I first started, there was a couple times where I took things apart and I go and check how many bolts I have left, and I have like 1 or 2 bolts left over, sometimes 3, and I'm thinking to myself, like, where did these bolts go? So like I said, if you don't have a good memory like I do, there's nothing wrong with recording your progress just to make sure you put everything back together right, or even writing it down. Get a piece of paper, write down a couple vacuum lines, 3, 4 vacuum lines, a connector, write down how many connectors, different things you unplugged, and then probably a bracket. You would list 2 brackets, 3 bolts, throttle, 4 bolts, 1 connector, hoses at the bottom. If you don't know what they're called, you can just call them hoses. You know, a little cheat sheet, make sure everything goes back together just right. Set the battery back in. And let's go start this vehicle up. Before you start the vehicle, just turn the key a couple times, because every time you turn the ignition key without starting the vehicle, the fuel pump in the back of the vehicle sends fuel to the fuel rail. So that's a good way of checking to see if your fuel rail is leaking any gasoline. Probably just 3 or 4 times. Turn it off, turn it back on. Like I said, that energizes the fuel pump and sends fuel to the fuel rail, and it will not overpressure it because of the fuel pressure regulator. Can't see any fuel. You still want to sniff around the engine to make sure you don't smell any gasoline. So everything seems to be okay. So those are just old oil spots. So now we are going to start the vehicle. And when you mess around with the fuel rail and you reduce the fuel pressure, the vehicle might start up and might run a little erratic, make a couple noises. That's just because the fuel pressure is trying to get back up to normal pressure. So it's not a problem. Just let it run for a while. If it runs funny and it starts to misfire, just come back over here to your engine and double check everything that was disconnected. Double check all your connections, all your vacuum lines, and just make sure everything is connected right. If it's not running right, kind of mess with everything that was unplugged and plugged back in, because sometimes the connection is poor. So just wiggle it a little bit, make sure it's good. If the engine's making a bad noise when you first start it back up and you wiggle on a connection and the problem seems to disappear, then you know where the problem is. So that'll help you out when you first start it up. If it starts up and it's acting kind of funny, you probably just forgot to plug something in. So just double check everything that was plugged. Wiggle on the connections, make sure it has a good connection. But in this case, the engine seems to be running just fine. It did have a misfire, and the misfire was not at idle. It was actually at around 45 to 50 miles per hour. So I'm gonna have to take this vehicle on the road and make sure it is actually okay. But as far as switching out the fuel injectors, that's pretty much it. Just gotta have a little bit of patience and pay attention to when you're putting everything back together. As long as you can remember how you took it apart, it should go back together just fine. And I know a lot of people are intimidated when it comes to working on a vehicle. When I first started working on vehicles, I wasn't sure myself. I mean, it's a little bit of trial and error, but hey, you get used to it. Just you got the manual, you got YouTube, you got the internet at your disposal, so you should be able to work on your own vehicle at home. So thanks for watching, everyone.